Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. The best of history, mystery, fiction, and nonfiction that I've been reading, along with exclusive interviews with the authors of those books. That's what you're going to find in each and every episode of Books and Looks. Hey, and let's not forget our partner, booktrib.com. You want book reviews? You want things to do with books? If it's bookish, you want to look at booktrib.com. So like I said, you want to talk about books, you want to look at Books and Looks, and then take a look at booktrib.com. You know, from the last living heir of an ancient West African storytelling dynasty to a lone woman who's making the rarest pasta on earth, today's guest, Elliot Stein, takes us on a spellbinding journey to meet the world's most remarkable cultural guardians. Through vivid storytelling, he introduces us to 10 artisans or keepers or protectors across 5 different continents who are preserving the dazzling traditions on the edge of disappearance. That's right. His profiles remind us how much wonder still exists in this world and invites us to fall back in love with the places, the practices, and the people who make this world such a magical place to live in. I'm Blaine DeSantis. This is Books and Looks, and today we're interviewing Elliot Stein on his new book, Custodians of Wonder. Elliot Stein, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Elliot, wonderful effort here. Custodians of Wonder, a great, great book. I've learned so much. Thank you. Thank you very much for educating me. I appreciate it.
It's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
You know, your book opens with a statement about how we always celebrate the first person to do something, the innovators, the inventors, but we never acknowledge the guy who's at the very end. Those people who are keeping the last of the traditions alive. How did you decide to focus on that? What made you want to zoom in on that particular aspect of the traditions?
Yeah, it's a great question. As a travel journalist, we often go around the world sort of with our antennas up, trying to get a sense of what makes a place a place. It's the foods that we eat at a certain place, or the languages we speak, the things we believe. But I find that so often there are individuals who sort of represent a community's worldview and sort of dedicate their life to maintaining or to carrying on this specific thing that a community believes. And so in a way, these people sort of personify a place. They're the epitome of what that place is and what they believe. And so as someone who's fascinated in kind of what makes us who we are, I've tilted myself towards these final custodians and tried to learn as much as I can from them, and their wisdom, and in doing so, trying to piece together what it is that makes a place unique.
You focus on 10 or 11 different people and traditions here, and as you said, you go all over the world. I think you have 5 continents, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's 10 chapters, 10 countries, and 5 continents.
Okay, wow. It does take you all over the world, and they're just wonderful things. One of the things you talk about here are some intimate moments with these tradition keepers. Uh, uh, Anything that you got? I mean, were they able to impart anything to you in these intimates? And how did you get that? How did you develop that bond with these people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I mean, there's no real one way to approach these final custodians. I mean, first of all, so many of them live in remote parts of the world. They don't have email. They might not have, WhatsApp. You don't just call them out of the blue. So it takes time to find these individuals. And then I found that with this book, and also just my reporting over the years in general, if you were looking to profile someone as a journalist, I think that it's only right and proper to approach these people with a certain amount of humility and respect and sincerity, because that's ultimately what you're looking for in return. You're hoping to hear their stories from an honest point of view, and it's only right that you approach people with a certain honesty about what your intentions are and what you're hoping to do by learning their stories. So I've been fortunate enough and found that when you talk to someone, when you first meet them, and you show an honest curiosity and sincerity and empathy towards what it is that they've dedicated their lives to, more often than not, these individuals are very willing to dive in and to share their experiences with you.
Mm-hmm. You didn't bump into a lot of other journalists while you were doing this, did you?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I don't know that any other journalists have ever been to certain places that I've been to in reporting the story. There was one instance in southern India where I think I was maybe the only foreign journalist to ever show up, and it was such a big deal that I was on TV there while reporting the story. In the first chapter in Mali and Guinea, I believe I was told I was one of the first foreign journalists in history to ever set eyes on this thing that's central to the first chapter of the book. This instrument called a balafon. Um, yeah, these are sort of out of the way places, but I think that's kind of what attracts me to them. They're not the sort of things that travelers and adventurers might encounter when regularly jet setting across the globe, but uh, things that I think are certainly worthy of attention and admiration, regardless.
Now, how long have you been a travel writer, and for whom do you write?
So I'm currently a senior journalist and editor at the BBC,
Okay.
specifically at BBC Travel, and I'm based here in Brooklyn, New York. I've probably been a travel journalist in one way or another for a few decades. I mentioned this in the introduction of the book, but my first travel story, the first one I ever wrote, was about 20 years ago, and it was this chance encounter with a final custodian that really awakened me to have a certain sympathy and reverence for these individuals. But I've been writing about travel and places and culture in one way or another for probably 2 decades. So
Wow.
before joining the BBC, I used to write for the New York Times, for the Washington Post, for CNN, for um, all kinds of places. But I've found a beautiful home here at the BBC.
That's great. Wonderful. I interviewed a travel journalist last year, a girl named Paige McClanahan. She works for the New York Times. Beautiful book she wrote about the new tourist. I learned a lot from her. So, hey, you said somewhere in the book, I think you mentioned that this being a father really made you, really want to work on this project even more. Brought it all home. How did that all come about, and how is that so important to this book?
Yeah. So I've been traveling around the world for about 7 years, profiling final custodians. And one of the stories that I wrote for the BBC, where I created a column called Custom Made, it won a pretty big award. And as part of that, you get to go to this fancy gala and meet with agents from all over the country. One of whom, Wendy Levinson, was amazing enough to sign me, and I sat on writing a proposal for a book for a long time. And then it was only when I discovered that I was going to be a father for the first time that this project kind of poured out of me. So within a few days, I'd written a 30, 40 page proposal. I knew exactly what I wanted to write. And that's because so much of my career has been profiling these people whose only wish in life is to pass on the skill that has been in their families for centuries to their children. And I don't know how to weave a bridge out of grass or how to make the world's rarest pasta. But my hope is that I could leave something for my soon to be born child that teaches them that the world can still be a wondrous place. And so that's kind of the inspiration for this. And he's now 3. And when the box of books arrived, he actually said to me, "Dad, I'm proud of you," which is the best review I could have gotten.
Absolutely. Nothing better than that. Yeah, let me tell you what, that weaving a bridge out of grass, where did that take place?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I think it's chapter 4 in the book, but it's all about the last Inca bridge master. So the Inca were one of the world's most incredible civilizations, and they developed in near isolation. But the way that they developed into the largest empire ever seen in the Americas was through this extraordinary road system. And unlike the Roman road system, which traversed a relatively uniform topography, I mean, give or take some mountains and valleys, the Inca's empire, it was 200 million square kilometers north to south, from the northern part of Argentina in the south to the southern part of Colombia. And we're talking the snow-capped peaks of the Andes, the steamy rainforests of the Amazon, and where they couldn't just bore tunnels, they created suspension bridges out of a type of straw or grass called Koya Ichu, which is Peruvian feathergrass. And at the height of the empire, in around 1300 or so, it's estimated that 200 of these grass woven suspension bridges um, traversed canyons. And today there's one left. It's in the southern highlands of Peru, and it is overseen by the very last Inca bridge master, who has maintained this tradition for more than 500 years, ever since the collapse of the Inca Empire, where men in his family have learned how to braid braid the straw and transform it into into coils that are stronger than steel. And once a year, because it has to be rewoven and rebuilt, he dangles precariously off these cables barefoot and risks his life to braid this suspension bridge over a rushing river some 7 stories above it. And I
My
saw it, and
God.
it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
How far is it from one side to the other side?
It is 29 meters, which is
Okay.
gosh, that is close.
What,
I can fact check this. I think it's
that'd
close
be
to
what,
100 feet.
80 feet? Yeah, 100 feet, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 95
My
feet.
God. My Lord. That's just some process. And this guy's hanging up there over the 7 feet over the stories over the river. I mean, I couldn't believe the magnitude of that job. And then he gets the whole village involved in helping him with collecting the grass and everything.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the beauty in this tradition, and in so many of the things that I'm profiling. It's not just about this bridge or about this pasta, but it's about how these things unite an entire community, or in this case, 4 communities. So in order to build this bridge, every single household in the 4 surrounding communities, and that's roughly 1,100 people, are each responsible for a certain amount of braided grass, and it's the length of from your elbow to your fist. And so his job is to bring all these things together, bring all these workers together, and to construct the bridge. But whether it's a bridge or pasta or any of these traditions, it speaks to a larger way that communities view the world, a certain worldview, and to them, kind of what it means to be human. So this bridge not only represents kind of the duality of life and death, but the unifying of heavens and earth, and this sort of yin and yang that was so core to the Inca philosophy and the way that they forged their empire. And the fact that it still exists 500 years after the collapse of the empire is remarkable.
And carries a substantial amount of weight. I mean, you can put a lot of people on that bridge. It's not just for a single individual.
Yeah, there was an engineer from MIT named John Oschendorfer, and he calculated that each of these suspension bridges, and he specifically looked at this one that I profiled because it's the last one left. Um, I mean, I think it was something like 80 adult men. And when the Inca constructed these things, they did it in such a way where it could hold the weight of a marching army. But it was also genius because when advancing armies were approaching, such as the Spanish, who obviously came after the Inca, they could cut it down and then later reweave it. So, needless to say, the Spanish had never seen anything like this when they first arrived in the New World, and they were terrified of it. There's so many chroniclers who report that Spanish conquistadors were crying and crawling across these bridges, and I actually had a chance to cross one myself after Victoriano Arizapana, the bridge master, wove it. It's utterly terrifying.
Yeah.
It feels like you're in a hammock that's swaying back and forth
Oh,
7 stories above a
my.
above a rushing river. And for someone
Oh,
who's
my.
afraid of heights as I am, it was utterly terrifying.
Oh, my word. That's some story. Now, 2 or 3 times you've mentioned pasta. Now, my wife is a cook, okay? And we love cooking. I'm Italian, so we cook pasta. Tell us a little bit about this pasta, because this is a fascinating story about this the world's rarest pasta. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I used to live in Sardinia, and I think a lot of listeners might hear the name Sardinia, and you associate that with beaches and luxury. Um, and there's some beautiful beaches there, and there's some probably nice hotels there. But really, what Sardinia is all about is this island that has been in the center of the Western world for forever, but kind of far away in the middle of the Mediterranean to remember a lot of age old ancient things. Um, it's got thousands and thousands of these mysterious Bronze Age towers that nobody knows what they mean. People there still speak the oldest living form of Latin called Sardo. Um, even people themselves are very, very old. It was the very first designated blue zone, where people are said to live longer than anywhere else. But in the center of the island, which is always sort of resisted foreign rule and Romans and Byzantines and everyone, um, there's there's this tiny village called Nuoro where 3 women alive know how to make the world's rarest pasta. It's called Sufilindeu, which in Sardo means the threads of God. And historically, the only way that you're able to eat the threads of God is to complete a 33-kilometer pilgrimage overnight from Nuoro to a tiny abandoned sanctuary in the middle of the mountains in a place called Lula. And that's what I did. And so for more than 300 years, this one family has tightly guarded the secrets to the threads of God. And it's made by taking semolina dough and pulling it with the tips of your fingers over and over and over again into 256 needle thin pieces of dough, and then weaving them on top of a circular base in 3 different layers. You then take it out to the Sardinian sun, let it dry, shatter it, and you put it into this mutton broth soup. And that's what sufilindeu is. But again, it's not just this pasta, but you have this festival that happens twice a year. And at the end of completing this pilgrimage, you're rewarded almost like a communion with the threads of God. And so it's this sacred dish that holds together an entire island and represents a history of banditry, of resisting foreign oppression, and essentially of Sardinia and Sardinian identity itself. The only women who know how to make this now are getting quite old, and they're finding a real difficulty in finding someone to carry this on. So with these women, and when these women go, the risk is that not only will this dish fall away, but this entire festival and symbolism that makes Sardinia what it is.
Wow. Wow. That's quite a story, and that's amazing. Now, you also got in that chapter. You mentioned something about how long it takes to make this. I mean, this is not something you can make in a day. How long does it take for them to make all this? The herds of God, ain't threads of God, whatever it's called. How long does it take them to do that?
Yeah, so and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people from across the island come and do this pilgrimage, and even more come who don't actually walk, but come to just taste the threads of God when it's served. So in order to prepare enough pasta to feed the island effectively, it's this lady who's kind of the main custodian and her 2 sisters-in-law, and together they work for weeks and weeks and weeks. They wake up every day at 7 a.m. They slip on an apron and they begin transforming this semolina dough into the threads of God. And it's, you don't make a living doing this. It's just sort of a selfless act that serves a community and represents kind of what it means to be Sardinian and the pride you have in coming from a place. And there's something very selfless and beautiful about that.
Yeah. Wow. Now, what is her name again?
So the main custodian is named Paola Abraini, and she
Okay.
has 2 sisters-in-law who also make it
Okay.
alongside her.
Now, the reason I asked that, I think I found a YouTube video of her making this. I think I found that. I'm not sure. A lot of people act like they know it, but I think I found one of her. And so, followers, if you're friends, if you're searching for this threads of God, it's out there. You can find it. But it's just an amazing thing. Just amazing. Because then she puts it around a circular dish or tray or something, and they're cutting this. It's amazing to watch them do this. My God. And that's part of the thing. There's this tension between modernization and traditionalism. And what are your travels, not just for this book, but your travels, are you finding there's a lot of that tension? Is the new modernization killing all these traditions?
It's a great question. I mean, it's yeah, there's something to be said for we're pricing out cultural heritage. I mean, Paula herself told me verbatim, you can't make a living making sufilindeo. There's no future in it. Um, yeah, I mean, I think one of the core themes of this book is that we're experiencing global homogenization in a way that we never have before. We lose 9 languages every year. Um, I think by 2040, it's estimated that half the world's languages will disappear. So many culinary traditions are at risk of vanishing. And in a world where we increasingly eat the same foods, speak the same languages, um, get coffee from the same Seattle-based chains, and stare at the same, Menlo Park made cell phones, there's something to me a little bit sad about that. And that's not to say that all of these advances and developments, they help people for sure. But as you so kindly said at the beginning of our talk, we're constantly looking towards the people who move us forward, the ones who are innovating in the name of progress. But I think it's also worthy of taking a moment to pause and reflect upon where we've come from, and these brilliant, beautiful, totally irrational things that humans do that make us who we are.
Yeah. It's, you know, thanks to your book, we know a lot about these now, okay? Well, not a lot, but we know what you told us. You know a lot more, I know. But go 20, 30, 40 years from now when some of these traditions are gone, those people have no idea there even was a tradition. That's sort of a frightening thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, it's hard to imagine yourself without knowing where you came from or your roots or kind of how you got to be here. And I'm not trying to say in this book that everything that is old is good and everything that is new is bad. Culture is obviously an ever evolving force, but I think there's value in taking a moment to sort of acknowledge these things and how they have shaped the places we come from. Because without that, we're sort of rootless.
Yeah. I'm 71. My kids are in their late 20s and early 40s. I got a gap there. I still say little nursery rhymes and ditties to them. And I say to myself, I don't think people know these anymore. Where have they gone? Little sayings, little ditties. When I mention Stephen Foster, who? It's like, what? They don't have any idea. I see it happening in my own family that we have forgotten some of these things that I grew up with knowing. These kids nowadays, they don't know that. So it's nice to be able to preserve something in a book such as this. You know, a lot of these people who you talked about here are concerned about not being able to find successors. Do they all have a successor they're grooming, or are there some which you think are probably going to go the way of the dodo?
It's a good question. I mean, it really depends. In certain instances, they're literally the last person alive who know how to do something, and that's a frightening concept. In other instances, their children um, have sort of a basis of how to do the thing that has remained within this family for centuries, but for economic reasons, for other reasons, just can't find can't find a reason to maintain it. And a good example of this is chapter 2 in the book. I profile a guy named Roland Board. He's a third generation night watchman, and probably the closest thing we have in the modern world to a medieval guardian. Every night he climbs up. He's 74 years old. He climbs up 13 stories to the top of a bell tower in Sweden and scans out the 4 windows in a north, south, east, west direction and looks for fires. Sweden is obviously a modern country. There are fire alarms everywhere. Practically speaking, you don't need this role anymore. But every night for more than 500 years, someone has gone up there to do it. And for the last 100 years, it's been a Borg. His father Fritz did it before him. His grandfather Helmer did it before him, and this guy Roland's son, he was grooming to do this job. But it's an hourly job. The benefits aren't great. The hours are pretty terrible, and the pay isn't great. And so his son, who now has a family of his own, can't afford, practically speaking, to do this job. And so what he's done, and I find this ironic and somewhat heartbreaking, is he's effectively a modern day night watchman, which means he works as a security guard in a mall just because the pay is better. So I think that's just one of many examples of kind of the give and take, tug and pull of why these traditions are at risk of disappearing, and um, how culture fades away.
Mhm. the city which he's a night watchman for. I think it made famous in the Wallander series, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. It's called Ystad. It's on the southern tip of Sweden, and it's the base of the Wallander series and franchise. So there's a incredible turn in the story, which I won't give too much away, but it's effectively known as Scandinavia's fictional murder capital. This place Wallander, blood-soaked bodies are dragged through the streets, and kind of all of these novels. Sweden is obviously it's a pretty safe place, but in the midst of profiling this custodian, Roland Borg, I learned that there's actually a terrifying criminal who has set his eyes on burning down all of the town, and that's it's an incredible, through no thanks of mine or anything like that, but just in listening to Roland, it's an incredible turn in the story that really adds a certain weight to this role, and that it's not just
It
a
does.
symbolic thing.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. I have two more episodes done. I'll be done with the TV show Endeavor on PBS. I don't know if you ever watched it, about Inspector Endeavor, Young Endeavor. You would think everybody dies in Oxford. I mean, every show there's 3 murders. It's amazing how that town has become the murder capital of England. The same way over there in Sweden. A lot of people are dying in that town. So, but that's really a cute little coincidence they have there. But yeah, it's tell us one of your earliest stories. Really, really was amazing about this West African family. This historical. They tell the history for oral history for hundreds and hundreds of years. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite ones. If only because it's no one has ever written about this guy. So chances are, if you're listening to this, unless you're a history major, you probably don't know a whole lot about the Mali Empire. But the Mali Empire was the greatest civilization to come out of West Africa. It spanned 9 modern day countries, and the way that it formed was that you had this ruler who's actually the inspiration for the real life Lion King, named Sundiata Keita. And when he united these different clans together to form the Mali Empire, he bestowed to this one person a sacred instrument called a soso bala. And this person's job wasn't just to play the soso bala, but as he did, to recite the history of the empire and to basically serve as a living library recording its memory. So the soso bala is called, it's known as a balaphone, and a balaphone is the precursor of the marimba, the xylophone. You hit it with slats. We hit it with kind of rubber mallets, and it's made with wooden slats. And so, in this astonishing tradition, for the last 27 generations, every male member of this one family, from the original keeper of this instrument, has learned how to master the instrument and to memorize what is now 800 years of West African history from the Mali Empire. The heir apparent to this tradition, and I should mention that the instrument still exists. It's kept in a 150-person village in Guinea that has no running water or electricity. And the heir apparent to guard and to keep this instrument no longer lives in West Africa. He lives in Medford, Massachusetts. And so through this weeks-long search to connect the dots from a West African emperor to this person in Medford, Massachusetts, I sent out an email to this person I'd never met before, kind of hopefully wondering if he would be willing to share his family story and to take me back to where it all started. And within 30 minutes of hitting send, I received a call from an unknown number on my cell phone. And the very first thing that the person said on the other end, before even saying what his name was, I've been waiting for an email like this for 20 years. So we were on the next flight with his family from Medford, Massachusetts to Bamako, Mali, the capital, where a lot of his family lives. And I met tons of his family, and we went to this village in Guinea. And I became the first foreign journalist effectively in history to see this instrument. But what's so remarkable about it is, UNESCO has an entire list called UNESCO Intangible Cultural Elements that effectively identifies the best of humanity. So this is everything from Chinese calligraphy, Indian yoga, cultural elements. The Soso Bala is the only one of the 678 UNESCO inscribed cultural elements that has remained within a single family. The only one. Um, and nobody has written about it. And so it was such a joy for me to get to meet this extended family and to profile them. And most thrilling for me, I think Bala, the keeper of this tradition, is thrilled with the job I did. I think he thinks I captured it with dignity and respect, which was my goal for each of these custodians. But just being able to introduce not just this tradition, but kind of similar to the Inca Empire. I mean, so many of these traditions have been, the Inca didn't have a written language, the Mali Empire didn't have a written language. We know next to nothing about them. And what we do know, the little we do know, is it's told from Spanish chroniclers, from North African traders, from French colonists. But so often we don't get a chance to hear about these traditions from the people themselves who are descended from it. And I feel like that's what this tradition and that with the grass woven suspension bridges gets to do, is to give these groups that have been otherized for so long a platform to tell their own stories.
Now, does he play this instrument while he's giving the oral history then? Is that how that works?
Yeah. So imagine, instead of playing a guitar and singing folk songs, you're playing an instrument and you're recounting these long epics, which are essentially like exaggeratedly long poems that kind of recount the history of, it can be a certain family's genealogy. It can be a story that, like a history lesson effectively. And so historically, these people who are called Jelly, that's Djeli, which in local language means blood. It said you can't, just as a human can't live without blood, a community can't live without a jelly. So these jellies they've not only recited historical epics, but they've sort of memorized a family's genealogy. They oversee births, death rituals, weddings. They kind of act as a spokesperson for a family or a community.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, friends, if you want to hear it, it is on YouTube. That's correct. What's the name of that instrument again?
It's called a balaphone. That's
Balaphone. Okay.
Balafon.
Mm-hmm. I listened to it. It's amazing, utterly amazing. Yeah. You don't know how often I went to the internet thanks to you. I mean, I'm searching everything. I'm looking on YouTube. I had a great time. Hey, there's one guy I was really, really impressed with, and he's the last one, the movie poster painter. Now, that's something I never heard of before. Tell us a bit about the movie poster painter, please.
Oh, it's a lovely one. So as long as there have been films, there have been film posters. In the early 1900s, most every theater around the world that showed films hired a full-time artist to depict the excitement and drama of the films that were shown. And, you'd typically pick out a scene and you would paint it. Then you'd hang it on the marquee or display it in a window outside the theater. As car culture got big, these posters became giant billboards to attract people on the road. And then over time, most every theater just started digitally printing them. That's what you see today. You might see it digitally printed with a printer or displayed on a TV, because that is far cheaper than using manual labor. There's one place left in the world that still employs a full-time film poster painter, and that is in Taiwan, in its oldest city called Tainan. And there's a man there named Yan Jinfa who's been painting the movies every day for more than 50 years. He's estimated to have painted more than 5,000 full-length giant billboards in his career. And in addition to painting them with deft brush strokes, he then, and now a man who's in his 70s, climbs up scaffolding on the side of a theater and hangs them panel by panel on the marquee. Years and years of doing this has led him to nearly go blind. So he can no longer see in one eye. He only has partial vision in the other, but he still sits in the first row of this old-time movie theater in Tainan, watches a film, and will then either perfectly capture what is on the digitally printed poster or recreate the film in a way that he thinks is more authentic to how he interpreted it, and will then create these billboards. And I had the amazing pleasure of meeting this gentleman. And in his case, the issue isn't just finding a successor, but over the years, a lot of these second run movie theaters in Taiwan and around the world have gone away. And this was especially true during COVID. You might remember that movie theaters were among some of the hardest hit places and businesses during COVID. And that's true in Taiwan too. So a lot of these places closed down. And so it's not just finding another artist who's going to be willing to take this up, but finding movie theaters that have the means to hire these artists.
Wow. Wow. That's wonderful. Now, I want to ask you this. Have you been talking to any bees lately?
Yeah, once upon a time in the rural reaches of England, most everyone who kept bees followed this bizarre and actually really touching tradition called telling the bees. And what telling the bees is it involves the beekeeper quietly going to the hive and relaying the most important, intimate moments and news that a family has. So this can be telling the bees about a birth in the family, quietly letting them know about a death, introducing the bees to a would-be partner and getting their approval before the wedding, and even just kind of local gossip and comings and goings. And this isn't just some cutesy tradition, but there are many, many, many instances where failing to tell the bees resulted in terrible events. Your hive could fly away, they could not produce honey, they could all dramatically die. Um, and so it took me more than a year, but I found some people in rural England who still maintain this tradition. And so this is the story of this tradition and more so human beings' long fascination and kinship with bees and how we sort of recognize something very much similar to ourselves in this species that we've long relied on for everything from our longest, cleanest burning light to the clothes that we wear. We're all wearing cotton. Um, to every second bite of food that we eat comes from a bee, and so um, it's kind of the story of this touching tradition and our kinship with bees.
Huh. One of the things that I like about the book here, Elliot, is that not only do you talk about these people and these traditions, you go into a bit of history about the area or the country or wherever you're at. And with the bees, and I'm not giving anything away here, but please tell us about the bee dancing and what that really means. I mean, I heard bees dance, but what are they trying to communicate with everybody?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning them. And diving into the history of each of these things was one of the most fascinating parts for me, and I hope for readers too. But just to give people more context, yeah. So I think it was an Austrian scientist who identified this thing called the waggle dance. And the waggle dance is basically a way that bees communicate where nectar and pollen is. Um, so it was long thought that bees pollinate flowers based on scent, where they will smell something and they will come back and other bees will just follow that. But what bees actually do is they come back to the hive, they do this very calculated dance that kind of looks like a figure eight boogie. And through that, they're able to communicate to the other bees in the colony exactly where this flower or source of pollen is. The bees then will, when they're doing things like deciding where to swarm and find a new home, they will effectively have democratic debates using the waggle dance to basically vote for where the new home will be. And so this waggle dance is very, very not only core to who bees are and how they communicate, but representative of human societies. I mean, some of the most successful human societies are use democratic debates and vote. And it just sort of underlines how similar bees and humans really are.
Yeah, that was I also found out that when apparently bees procreate, the males join with the females, and then they sort of drop off and die. I've been sitting there trying to find a YouTube on that. I haven't found that yet. Did you ever see that?
Didn't see that, no, but
Okay.
yeah, it's one of the probably one of the most dramatic mating rituals in the animal kingdom. But yeah, so male bees, they don't sting, they don't pollinate, they really have one job, and that's to procreate with the female. Um,
Okay.
about 95% of them don't get the chance to do that one job, but they just kind of sit around eating honey. But when it's their turn to mate, a bee will go on her kind of inaugural mating flight, and this is a queen, and it's kind of every drone, which is a male bee. Every drone's for themselves, and they try to latch onto the female when they're flying about 20 miles an hour, um, and effectively inseminate her. And when they do, there's an audible pop. Its genitalia explodes, and they fall dramatically to their death. Um, it's it's quite a way to go out.
Yeah, it certainly is. Smile on their face, huh? Oh, my word. Now, this book covers 10, actually 11. We talk a little bit about the lady in the beginning from Burano, but how did you separate these from others? Were there others that didn't make the list?
Of course, I mean, I it's 10 chapters in the book, four of which were inspired by and expanded upon from stories that I'd previously done for the BBC. Six are totally original. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for years, and I have quite a mental Rolodex of fading traditions, but also just stuff that I've done before. And so, when trying to think of which 10 stories I want to focus on here, it's obviously geographical diversity was very important to me. I didn't want each of these to just be Asian or South American. And then thematic diversity. I didn't want each of these to be a handmade craft or food or something that was an oral tradition. So I was hoping that there could be a bit of everything in here that in a way sort of reflects the richness of culture and
Yeah.
humanity itself.
Well, it does. Now, that which brings me to basically my last question here. What's next for Elliot Stein? Are we talking another 10? Are we Custodians of Wonder Part 2, or where are you going next? You write another book?
Oh gosh. I don't know that I've thought that much ahead. I mean, I'm still writing and reporting for the BBC. I quickly found how much I love writing books. I hope that there's another one in my future before too long. Um, I guess it's a little early for me to tell, but for now I'm enjoying being a father, being a reporter. I'm enjoying talking to fascinating, wonderful people like yourself who seem to resonate with the book in some way, and hopefully there's another one in store.
Yeah, I hope so. But by the way, if you had to pick one, just one of these 10, that is most likely to go away, which one do you think it's going to be?
Great question. I mean, there's so many. I think just because it's purely based on economics, I think the film poster painter is something that probably will fade away when Yan Jinfa goes himself. There's just there's no money left in it, and it's not just finding another master, but it's finding a venue to support it. Um, but I think you could make a very good case that with each of these 10, it's very unlikely that when my 3-year-old is my age and I'm 41, that these things may exist.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I thought I can't see anybody want to make those bridges over the Andes there. That's just that's too nerve wracking for me. I can't imagine him finding somebody to do that. But I hope he does. Anyway, listen, Elliot Stein, you have been delightful. You have been wonderful. You have been informative. You've written a great, great book. Again, it's called Custodians of Wonder. You want to pick this up because you're going to learn a whole heck of a lot about a lot of great people keeping traditions alive. And so, hey, Elliot, thanks so much for joining us on Books and Looks.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Custodians of Wonder. Yep, that's the name of the book. Friends, you want to get this one. You're going to learn so much about these people who are the last people keeping some of these traditions alive throughout the world. I learned so much. Elliot was a wonderful guest. I'm going to tell you what, this was a spectacular, spectacular effort. What am I looking at? Hey, I'm looking at what have we had so far? If you haven't had a chance, we talked about a trip to Provence. We've talked about the last seed bank or protecting the seed bank in Leningrad during the siege. We talked about Amy Semple McPherson. There are a lot of really wonderful authors we've had on so far, and the future is going to be really, really good. I got one next week. Her name is Debbie Levy. She's going to be talking to us about the infamous Scopes monkey trial back in the 1920s. Evolution versus creationism. Oh, yeah. This is one heck of a show coming up. One great book, so you're not going to miss that. So anyway, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks. Say, may all of your leaves be pages in a book.